Hello, I'm Jamie Crooked, guest editor with Valiant Scribe, and I'm here today to interview esteemed poet Melanie Han. Melanie was born in Korea. She grew up in East Africa, and she's currently pursuing her MFA in Boston. This January, Melanie published a beautiful poem entitled An Onslaught in our Life in the Time of COVID series at Valiant Scribe. Melanie has graciously offered to talk with us today about her poem and the experiences that brought her to writing it. Given the recent tragedy in Atlanta and the increase in anti Asian hate, we're happy to have Melanie here to share her own experience and how it influenced her poem. Melanie, thank you for coming today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me.
I think we'll start with your reading your poem.
An onslaught. February. Hyoin, your dad and I think you should cancel your spring break trip to Morocco. No, Mom, we already booked everything. We'll be fine. We're all young and healthy. March. Boston, Lisbon, Madrid, Marrakesh. Getting lost in the windy streets of Medinas, eating lamb tagines and drinking mint tea. Architecture of the old city. Warm weather. Sahara Desert tour, Berber camping, camel trekking, sandboarding, stargazing. Unplugged, unaware, unaffected. Fez, Chefchaouen, Tangier, whispering, Corona, Corona. Fate coughing at me while ushering siblings out of my way, spitting in my direction, hitting me with cardboard boxes, yelling at me to go back to where I came from. Tangier, Madrid, Lisbon, Boston. Wary travelers wearing masks, sudden onslaught of information. COVID-19, coronavirus, novel coronavirus, stay at home, wash your hands. The college has made the difficult decision to transition all in person classes to online learning for the remainder of the spring term. Babe, I got laid off. Sorry. I'm sure we'll figure out a way to pay rent. Hyoin, your dad and I got kicked out of the grocery store today because the locals didn't want us virus spreaders shopping with them. CDC, unemployment. Although we have been thinking creatively about meaningful tasks to keep the office busy, unfortunately, we may not have enough remote work to keep you all over the coming weeks. Deaths. Who? April. Corona. Stay at home. Corona. Wash your hands. We don't know when this will end. Corona.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Melanie. I appreciate it. Such a beautiful, emotional poem that um, struck me in reading it the first time. And I'm sure that, you have a lot of emotion that goes into it and a lot of unique experiences. Could you tell us a little bit about what inspired the poem and how it was impacted being Asian in a time of COVID?
Yeah, so I feel like I initially wrote the poem just after coming back from my trip to Morocco. And it was hard because it's something that I didn't really know how to process. And writing for me is a great way to process emotions. Reading it again in light of just the recent things that happened in Atlanta, has just given a rise to new emotions that I have to continue to learn how to process. And I feel like as time goes by and there's a continued sense of Asian hate and anti-Asian sentiment, yeah, I'll just probably continue to write in order to think through those things.
Thank you. One of the things that struck me about your poem is I love your use of dialogue and the decision to use direct dialogue in your poem. And you, for example, you write, Hoin, your dad and I got kicked out of the grocery store today because the locals didn't want virus spreaders shopping with them. Is this based on an actual experience? And how did your parents feel about that? And how did you feel?
Yeah, unfortunately, it is based on a real experience. And my parents still live in East Africa, where I grew up. And with a lot of the misconceptions with COVID and just the fact that they are some of the few Asians that live in Tanzania. I think there was just a lot of anti-Asian sentiment that came with being associated with COVID. And so when they texted me about this experience, I was so upset and I was really angry that in a country where they've been living for almost 25 years, they still weren't accepted and felt like they had to be outsiders.
Um, that brings me to my next question. Being Korean and not Chinese, were you surprised by the reaction people have to you in the time of coronavirus? Is it something your family anticipated?
That's a good question. So, I think just physically, because we look East Asian, a lot of people don't immediately see or know the difference between whether we are Chinese, whether we're Korean, whether we are Japanese. And so I wasn't too surprised by it. And it was kind of a confirmation of my fears coming true.
And how did you feel when people ostracized you as a spreader? Is this your first experience of um, of such widespread feelings of isolation or being ostracized for your race?
Yeah, so growing up in a country where I didn't look like the majority of people, I always did feel a sense of isolation and ostracization. However, this was the first time that it was openly very aggressive and negative. And so at first I felt really confused and just hurt and afraid, to be honest.
Thank you. And thank you so much for sharing your poem and your story. And I think it helps all of us really understand that we often hear of anti-Asian hate, but there's a single story for every person that it impacts. And we really appreciate your sharing your story with us. Could you tell us a little bit about what was your intention of writing your poem and your intention of sharing it with the world? And are those two things the same?
Hmm. So I think my initial intention was, like I said, just to process. But my intention in sharing it with the world was to raise awareness of things that were happening. And like you said, every person has their story, their experiences. And so I just wanted to bring to light what my experiences were. And I think that the two of them can be the same. In this case, I think they kind of are. And I just hope that people reading this poem can have an opportunity to just listen to each person, to each story, and be aware of what's happening and stand in solidarity against these types of things.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing your story. With the unfortunate rise of anti-Asian hate, it's especially meaningful, I think, to our community to hear your words. And your poem is beautiful. I look forward to hearing more of your work. You're working on a poetry collection. Could you tell us a little bit about that before you go?
Sure. So my poetry collection just focuses on what it means to have grown up abroad and what it means to find home in a sense of belonging, but also identity, culture, differences, and things like that. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for spending your time with Valiant Scribe. We appreciate your being here and we look forward to reading more from you.
Of course. Thanks.
Thank you.